The scripture selected this morning is from Matthew chapter 24, verses 42 through 44. Therefore, be on alert, for you do not know which day your Lord is coming. But be sure of this, that if the head of the house had known at what time the night the thief was coming, he would have been on the alert and would have not have allowed his house to be broken into. And for this reason, you must also be ready, for the Son of Man who is coming at an hour when you do not know and do not think he will.
Before we get into our lesson this morning, I do want to remind everybody again, just because of the time frame of it, winter camp is coming up December 27th through the 30th. I bring it up because if you want to go to winter camp and get a free, you're confident in the blessing that you have in Jesus Christ. I hope you're counting those blessings, and even this week, as it is a week in which we're all thinking about what we're thankful for and celebrating Thanksgiving, I really pray that we share our thankfulness for the blessings that we have in Jesus Christ. When I was about 18 or 19 years old, I had a couple different jobs at Fresno State, and I had a job where I had to provide kind of like on-site security. It wasn't like I was a security guard. You had police officers, and then you had security guards, and then you had like us down here, okay? So we weren't even like real security guards. It was like, we need a body to stand right here and make sure no one touches that. That's what we need you to do. And I remember I volunteered one time because I thought I'd get some extra money, and it was an overnight shift. I had this big plan. I said, okay, Zinni will, because me and Zinni were dating at the time, she could come up to Fresno, stay at my house because I'm going to be working all night at Fresno State. The morning I'll go back to the house, and we could have a whole day together. It was a horrible plan. But anyway, I had this job where I had to guard at the baseball stadium at Fresno State. I had to sit by the gate overnight and make sure no one went into the baseball stadium because they were having an auction the next day for sports memorabilia, and all the sports memorabilia was out there on the baseball field. So I pulled my truck up right next to the gate, and I sat in my truck. And then 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock came, and this is before cell phones, so I had nothing to do. And I remember I fell asleep in my truck. I had one job. My one job was to watch the gate and make sure no one went in. Well, I fell asleep. I wake up at 1 a.m. in the morning, and there's like 25 frat boys all in the baseball stadium playing Frisbee, like throwing a Frisbee around. And I wake up to this, and I get out of the truck, like, hey, guys, you can't be here. Like, oh, no, we're just going to throw the Frisbee around a little bit. I'm like, that's my one job. I can't let you do that. You're going to have to leave. Thankfully, they left, and I didn't get caught that I fell asleep in my truck. But I had one job, and that was to be alert, to be ready, to watch and make sure no one went into the stadium. And there's some jobs like that, right? During these last few weeks, there's been a lot of talk about air traffic controllers, right? How important they are because they keep watch to make sure that planes in the air or on the runway don't run into each other. It's important to have people that keep watch for that. And if that ever happens, the first people we go to, we're like, whoa, what did the air traffic controllers see? How come they let that happen? It's important for them to keep watch and to be ready at all time to make sure that no disaster strikes. That same terminology is used by Jesus in that passage that John read in Matthew chapter 24. He says, therefore, keep watch. Now, this is in the context of, it's a troubling passage. It's a challenge for sure. But he talks about the fall of the temple in Jerusalem, and then he goes into a kind of a comparison to his final second coming and things like that. But nevertheless, we can get this main idea. He says, therefore, keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. And then he gives an illustration. And then he says, so you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. Pretty clear, right? The teaching is there. Keep watch, be ready. Right? I had to watch that gate at the baseball stadium. I failed in it, right? Keep watch, be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. At 1 a.m., I didn't expect 30 kids from Alpha Sigma whatever to show up and, throw the Frisbee on the baseball field. Keep watch, be ready, for you do not know when the Son of Man will come. With that in mind, let's go into our parable for today. Remember, we've been studying the parables here on Sunday morning. Jesus spoke in parables a lot. That was one of his primary teaching tools. A parable is kind of an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. It's an illustration that promotes discussion, dialogue. It causes you to have to focus in, and it kind of weeds out the people that don't want to pay attention. And that's often why Jesus spoke in parables, because those that have an ear to hear are going to be the ones that hear. Well, this morning, we're going to be looking at a parable in Matthew chapter 25. So we started with the end of chapter 24. Remember, there's no chapters in the original text, so they flow into the next one. Chapter 24 ends with, keep watch, be ready. And then he goes into chapter 25 with this parable that we often call the parable of the 10 virgins. Now, I want to talk about that title real quick, and just because it does catch our attention, we're like, well, that's odd. Why is virginity the topic of conversation here, or something like that? Don't overthink that term so much. It doesn't carry with it the sexual connotation as much as we might use that term today. Back then, you would have, most of the time, the way they would identify ladies was their marriage status, okay? Especially in that ancient world. You would have wives, which the Greek word for woman and wife is actually the same word, and it's used interchangeably. So you had wives, you had widows, those that had been married and their husband had passed, and then you had those that here it's translated virgin, or it might also be translated maidens, the unmarried. And then before that you'd have children and so on. But of marriage age, you would have maidens or virgins, wives, or widows. The idea of kind of a single career woman, things like that, what would have been foreign to this culture at this time. So that's why they choose that term. But some of our modern translations actually even translate it differently. They call this the parable of the 10 bridesmaids, just to make sure we kind of understand the emphasis is not on what we might think that word is emphasizing. It has to do with this role, this title. These are unmarried, single women of marrying age is what it is. So here you have the parable of the 10 bridesmaids. Now, before we get into this text, let's break down a little bit and make sure we understand ancient Jewish wedding traditions, because all of us have been to weddings before. We've seen weddings on TV. Many of us are married. We've been to weddings and so on. So we have our own traditions that we're used to. But ancient Jewish weddings would be a little bit different than ours. An ancient Jewish wedding, that circle shouldn't be there, by the way, so I'm going to go all the way forward so it's around what I want. All right. An ancient Jewish wedding in the first century had a couple different terms with it. You would start with a betrothal. Remember, Mary and Joseph were betrothed? It's kind of like you're engaged here. So you have this legal engagement that would have been called a betrothal. Then from that, after you're betrothed, you set up, okay, we're going to get married. The groom would then go and maybe prepare the home for the coming of the bride, okay? So the groom would go make sure the house is ready. Maybe he's building it. Maybe he's adding a room onto the father's home, something like that. So the groom would go away, and then the groom would come back for the ceremony. So we have a betrothal. It could be of any length of time. The groom goes away, prepare the house. The groom comes to come back in kind of a procession. So the groom goes and prepares the house, gets all of his friends and family and all of that, and is bringing them kind of like a parade to the place where the wedding was going to be. And then what would happen is the bridesmaids would go out and greet the arrival of the groom. Now, in our culture, bridesmaids stand up on the stage with the bride, maybe hold her bouquet for her, make sure she doesn't step on her dress and things like that. Back then, the bridesmaids had a responsibility to the groom. So the 10 virgins or the 10 bridesmaids here would go out, and they would greet the groom as he was coming in with the lamp, kind of like lighting the road, providing they didn't have electricity, providing the light on the road for the whole wedding processional to come into the place where the wedding feast was. So everybody would go on into where the wedding feast was, and after everybody comes on inside, they shut the door, and if you're outside, you can't come in because the door has been closed. Now, what's unique about this is you kind of had to be ready at a moment's notice because you didn't have watches. You didn't have cell phones. You just knew that sometime soon that groom is showing up for the wedding ceremony, so you had to be ready, which drives me crazy because I'm a person who likes schedules. As I mentioned this morning, the whole idea of you start when everybody shows up is foreign to me, but I'm not in a first century Jewish wedding. So that's how they would do this. With that as the backdrop, we have this parable here of these 10 virgins. So let's read the parable, and then we will kind of break it down. It says, then the kingdom of heaven will be comparable to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 of them were prudent. For when the foolish ones took their lamps, they took no oil with them. Now, this is interesting, by the way, because if you look at these ancient Jewish wedding customs, the idea that the bridesmaids are in charge of the lamp, you're like, that's odd. Don't you think you'd have workers that do that? But it was a position of honor. You had this position of honor where you are lighting the way of the coming groom. Most of your pictures of these lamps look like this. It's not accurate, by the way. I did some digging into these terms of this. The word that is used for lamp is actually torch, which is really cool because it makes sense when you look at these parables. The virgins here, these bridesmaids, all had torches that were supposed to be prepared. They were like rags wrapped around a pillar or a post, and they had to be soaked in oil, and you would light that, and you would hold it out to light the way of the coming groom. It would look something kind of like this, like almost like a medieval torch or like an Olympic type torch type thing. So you would have this torch that you would light, and it would quickly absorb the oil, so you had to make sure you had a lot of it. But it would provide they would light the streets. Imagine 5 bridesmaids on one side, 5 bridesmaids on the other, holding up a torch as the groom and the wedding processional comes in to be a magnificent thing, right? It's a position of honor. It is an important position because if only 5 of them have their torches and 5 of them don't, it's going to be dark. It's going to be dishonorable. It's going to be disrespectful. It's going to ruin the wedding, right? At Owen and Janelle's wedding, they had these glow sticks. I couldn't find their picture. They didn't get it to me in time. But look, it kind of looks like them. But we use these glow sticks and these like boom sticks, which we held out, and the wedding party went through them, kind of lighting the way. That was similar custom at this time. So the bridesmaids here had one big major job. Their major job was to make sure that they had their torches ready, because when you hear the groom is coming, they go outside, they light their torch, they hold it up, and everybody comes on in. They had to light the path of the arriving groom. But what do we find out here in this parable? Well, verse 2, 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were prudent or wise. For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. But the prudent took oil in their flasks along with their lamps. So some were ready, some were not. Now, when the bridegroom was delaying, because you don't know when he's going to show up, maybe it took a while to get the house ready. While the bridegroom was delaying, they all got drowsy and fell asleep. Now, there's nothing wrong with falling asleep here. It wasn't like they were sinning by falling asleep. Other parables, when you're sinning, when you're sleeping, it's bad. Here, well, you don't know how long it's going to take. Let's take a nap. Okay? So they fall asleep. But at midnight, verse 6, when they least expected it, there was a shout, "Behold, the bridegroom, come out to meet him." And all those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. So they trimmed the wick, they dunk them in their oil, they light them on fire, they go out to the outside. But the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise said, "No, there will not be enough for us. You go instead to the dealers and buy some for yourself." By the way, it's midnight, probably hard to find a store open. But while they were going away to make the purchase, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready, so the bridegroom shows up, 5 of them go outside with their torches, they meet the bridegroom, it's a great celebration, a huge parade, and they go into the place where the wedding feast was going to be, and the door is shut. Later, the other virgins also came, saying, "Lord, Lord, open it up for us." But he answered, "Truly I say to you, I do not know you. Be on the alert then, for you do not know the day or the hour." Notice how this parable concludes. The same way chapter 24 ends. Be on guard, be on watch, be ready, be alert. Hear the same thing. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know the day or the hour. Interesting parable. Of course, in our modern culture today, some of the traditions here are kind of lost on us. Some of it seems foreign to us. The way they did weddings are different than the way we do weddings. But this illustration would be very meaningful to that audience. Because if there's one thing that's cross-cultural, either the year 2025 or the year 30 AD, is you don't want to mess up someone's wedding, right? That's something you'll remember forever. And here, this is such a social faux pas for these bridesmaids to mess this up. Everybody, when Jesus gave this parable, went, they gasped, like, they didn't bring their oil? You're telling me the groom showed up in the dark? I mean, that's huge, right? So he gives this parable of these foolish virgins who these five that were foolish, didn't bring oil, they were unprepared, they missed out, they begged for help, help was there, and they got locked out of the wedding. Okay, all that being said then, what are we supposed to learn from this? What are the lessons that we can learn from this parable? Well, is there some subtext here? Is there some depth here that we can take from this? Or is it just a generic story of, they messed up. Hope we're not like them. Let's break this down a little bit. I think it's neat here that you kind of notice that not all of them who looked like they were ready were actually ready. I think this might be some subtext here that kind of refutes some of the Jewish leaders in that culture. They were acting holy and self-righteous, but they really weren't. All of them had lamps. Every single one of these bridesmaids had lamps. They had their torches. They looked the part. If you saw them, okay, bridesmaids, do you have your torches? We got our torch. Okay, everybody dressed, ready? Okay, good. Hang out here when the groom arrives. We'll get you. But even though on the surface they looked ready, they weren't. Not all the bridesmaids were the same. They looked like it at first. They had their lamp. They were waiting for the groom. They all fell asleep. They all did that. But only 5 of them were actually ready. I think there's a lesson here. Outward appearance is not the same as inward readiness. In chapter 24, there was a lot of people that were saying, I'm ready for whatever comes, Jesus. But they weren't. They were faking it. They were going through the motions. They had the appearance of righteousness. But inside, they were those whitewashed tombs, right? Full of dead men's bones. Outward appearance is not the same as inward readiness. I think we're really good at looking the part. We look like we're ready for the groom to arrive. Nope, everything's ready. We're good to go. Yeah, but have you checked the music? Is it cued right? Well, we haven't done that yet. All right, we're ready for the groom to arrive. Yeah, but does the flower girl have her bouquet? Well, we haven't got that yet. Okay, we're ready for the wedding to begin. Are grandma and grandpa seated, right? You look like everything's together, but inside things are falling apart. Oftentimes we're like that too. We go to church every Sunday, but are we living like the church in how we talk to people? We praise God on Sunday, we curse our neighbor on Monday, right? There's a difference there between going to church and being the church. Maybe we claim Christianity. I'm a Christian. I'm a child of God. I love Jesus. I believe too. But there's nothing about our life that is full of the Holy Spirit. We're living a life of bitterness and anger and greed and lust and selfishness. That's going through the motions. That's like the 5 foolish virgins here. Maybe we look like we'd have it all together. We show up on Sunday, Bible under our arm, looking all holy, but yet in our lives we are completely unprepared to meet Jesus. Not all who are ready, who appear ready, are actually ready. And what I also see here in this parable is it's up to you to be ready for Jesus. Notice he eliminates the excuse here. They turned to the other bridesmaids. So the 5 who didn't have the oil turned to the other bridesmaids and said, quick, give us some of your oil. Well, they should share, right? I mean, maybe there's plenty of oil to go around. I think Jesus is making a point. When he comes back, you can't turn to someone else to save you. At that moment, when the groom, by the way, the groom in the story is Jesus, just in case you missed that point. When Jesus comes back, when the groom arrives, you can't go, quick, help me get ready. Jesus is here. It's too late. And you can't blame other people for your lack of readiness. When Jesus comes back, you can't go, well, it's not my fault they didn't share. When Jesus comes back, you go, well, it's not my fault the oil store was closed. See, so often when it comes to following Jesus, we blame other people. We blame other people for our lack of faithfulness, and you can't do that because when he comes back, there are no excuses. If the groom shows up in your one job, okay, your one job was to flip on the light switch when the groom walked into the auditorium and you didn't flip on the light switch, you blew it. That was your one job, okay? Back then, the groom shows up. Their one job was to light the path with the torch. One job. That's no excuse. Well, I wasn't ready. That was the one job you were supposed to do. Well, no one told me. No one reminded me to check for oil. My alarm didn't go off or something like that. You can't blame others for your lack of readiness. You can't blame parents. But my parents, they raised me this way. My parents taught it me wrong. I had a bad mom. I had a bad dad. So therefore, I don't. No excuse. It doesn't work. You can't blame others for your unpreparedness. Yeah, your parents may have stunk, but you can't blame them for your unpreparedness to meet Jesus. You can't blame the church. Well, the church I grew up in was really hypocritical. The church I grew up in had these faults. It had this drama. I was forced to go when I was a kid, you can't blame other people. Well, society makes me this way. You know, it gets me so distracted. I get so upset. I get so anxious. You can't blame society. Well, if you lived my life, if you knew what I've been through, then you wouldn't be ready either. Oh, I guarantee it. If you had my experience, you wouldn't be ready to meet Jesus. The bridesmaids had one job, and there was no excuse for them falling short in that regard. Now, all of those things can be awful. Bad experiences at home, bad church experiences. Yeah, society is awful at times. You could have gone through some major trauma in life, I understand. And that can make it harder to be ready, for sure. But we still have that one job. Be ready for the bridegroom to come. Because lesson number 3, there will be a time where the door will close. And here they said, Lord, Lord, open the door for us. Now, I had to research this a little bit because it seems odd to me. Like, well, you let people in, right? No, they would literally lock the door. If you didn't come in when the groom came in, you missed out on the ceremony. Once the groom's party entered, the door stayed closed. Now, even in our culture, it's rude to arrive late for a wedding. But if we actually locked the door and said, go away, you can't come, people would get really upset, right? But they would close the door, and you would miss out on the wedding feast, which was the social event of the year, right? In that culture. That was where everybody's at. You're supporting this family. But if the door closed and you weren't inside, it stayed closed. What's the lesson? When Jesus comes back, it's final. There's no other chance. The door will be closed, and either you're ready or you're not. Now, the good part of this lesson is right now, you still have a chance to come to Him. Right now, the door is open, but that door will not stay open forever. Jesus can come like a thief in the night. Matthew 24 says. In 1 Thessalonians, it mentions the same idea. Right now, the door is open. It hasn't been closed yet. You still have time. But you do not know when they're going to yell, the bridegroom is here. Get your torches. We don't know when that's going to happen. Right now, the door is open, but it will not stay open forever. So later the others came, and they said, Lord, Lord, open the door for us. Now notice what he says here. This is a callback to something Jesus had already said in the book of Matthew. Remember on the Sermon on the Mount? We'll come back to this. But in this illustration here, they come to the door, and notice they don't say, family, let us in. They say, Lord, Lord, let us in. Now, Master, Master, probably a callback to the true Lord Jesus Christ. Lord, Lord, let us in. But he replied, truly I tell you, I do not know you. But they're in the wedding party. You know them. Your family, right? If you're not inside, I don't know you. That's harsh. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know the day nor the hour. What does that sound like to you? Remember back in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7? In chapter 7, Jesus says this. So this is the words of Jesus twice. He says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. But Lord, Lord, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. The will of the groom in this parable is have your lamps ready, but they weren't ready. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, you can imagine these bridesmaids saying, but we've grown up together. We went to school together. I've known your family for years. I've been planning this. I bought my dress for this occasion. And they said, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And in your name cast out demons? And in your name perform many miracles? That's like us saying, well, I went to church. I gave my money. I read my Bible. I posted a couple verses on Instagram, right? That kind of thing. And he said, then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. That's Jesus here saying, I don't know who you are. Get away from me, you evildoers. The parable of the bridesmaids, the 10 virgins, teaches us that one, they only had one job. That one job was keep watch and be ready because the groom was coming. The big question then we all have to answer this morning is this: are you ready for Jesus to arrive? You don't know when he's coming. One day there'll be that shout, the bridegroom is here, or like how it's described in 1 Thessalonians, the shout, the voice of an archangel, and the trumpet of God. Are we ready for Jesus to come back? I want you to be ready. If you're here this morning and you're not, maybe you need to confess sin, maybe you need the prayers of this church, maybe you need to learn some more, maybe you're ready to come to Jesus and be baptized into him, we can help you. Just talk to somebody before it's too late. Don't put it off any longer. Follow Jesus today. Let us help you. I'll be up here for about a verse of the song. Afterwards, we can talk as well. Reach out anytime to any of the leaders here. We want to help you be ready. All of us must keep watch and be ready because one day Jesus is coming back, and we want his coming back to be a blessing to us. We want to be praising him, going, yes, come, Lord Jesus. The lesson is yours. Let's all stand and let's sing the song that was selected.